Hello, welcome to Mr. John's Story Time. Tonight we're going to read Mr. Quiet by Roger Hargreaves. Let us begin. Mr. Quiet liked the quiet life. He lived quietly in a small little cottage in the middle of a wood. The problem was that the small little cottage was in the middle of a wood, in the middle of a country called Loudland. Everything and everybody in Loudland was noisy. Oh, the noise. Dogs didn't go, woo! Like dogs you know. They went, now take a deep breath, whoa! People didn't shut their doors like you or I would shut our doors. They slammed them. Bang! People didn't talk to each other. They shouted at each other. Hello! They'd shout as they met in the street. And you've heard about something being as quiet as a mouse, haven't you? Not in Loudland. They had the noisiest mice in the world. Squeak! Squeak! They'd roar at each other. Mr. Noisy would have loved living in Loudland. He'd have loved it, but Mr. Quiet didn't. Noise frightened him. So he stayed in his cottage, in the middle of his wood, as much as he could. But of course he couldn't stay there all the time. Every week, for instance, he had to go shopping. He used to creep into the greengrocer's shop. Good morning, bellowed the grocer. What can I do for you? Poor Mr. Quiet. He replied in a whisper. Please, he whispered, could I have some cornflakes, please? What? Cornflakes, please, he whispered. Speak up! Mr. Quiet tried his loudest whisper. Cornflakes! Can't hear you, shouted the greengrocer. Next, please! And poor Mr. Quiet had to creep away without any cornflakes. It wasn't fair, was it? He crept into the butcher's. Please, he whispered, I'd like some meat. The butcher didn't even hear him. He was humming to himself, loudly and fiercely. Mr. Quiet tried again. Please, he whispered, I'd like some meat. The butcher started to whistle. It sounded more like a burglar alarm than a whistle. Mr. Quiet fled, empty-handed. It often happened, which probably explained why he was so little. Poor Mr. Quiet. He sat at home that night with a feeling of despair. Whatever am I to do? He thought. It's no use, he thought. I'll just have to try again. And so the following day he went shopping again. But the same thing happened. Can't hear you, thundered the grocer. Next, please. Can't hear you, bellowed the greengrocer. Next, please. Can't hear, replied the milkman. Next, please. Can't hear you, replied the butcher. Next, please. Oh dear. Poor Mr. Quiet went home and went to bed hungry. The morning after, he was awakened by a noise which sounded like bombs dropping. It was the Loudland postman knocking at Mr. Quiet's door. Bang! 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 Mr. Quiet went and opened the door. Morning! Shouted the postman. Letter for you! Mr. Quiet took the letter into his kitchen. He sat down to open it. He waited until the noise of the postman's footsteps had died away. Clump! 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 Mr. Quiet opened the letter in great excitement. He'd never had a letter before. It was from Mr. Happy in Happyland, an invitation to stay. Mr. Quiet was overjoyed. He rushed upstairs and packed his bag and set off that very morning. It was late when he arrived on Mr. Happy's doorstep. He knocked on Mr. Happy's door. Tap, tap, tap. Mr. Happy opened the door. Hello, he smiled. I thought I heard something. You must be Mr. Quiet. Well, don't you just stand there. Come in and have some supper. It was the first proper meal Mr. Quiet had had for months, and while he was eating, he told Mr. Happy all about his problems he'd been having in Loudland. Mr. Happy was most sympathetic. Over breakfast the following morning, Mr. Happy told Mr. Quiet that he'd been thinking about his problem. "I think," he said, "that under the circumstances, you'd be better staying in Happyland." Mr. Quiet's face lit up. "And," continued Mr. Happy, "we'll find you a house. And," he went on, "a job." Mr. Quiet's face dropped. "I'm not very good at jobs," he confessed, "because I'm too quiet." "Ah," smiled Mr. Happy, "I have the very job for a quiet little chap like you." And so, the very next day, Mr. Quiet started work, and he loves it. Do you know where he works? In the Happy Landing Library. As you know, everybody who goes into a library has to be quiet, and only whispering is allowed. What a clever idea of Mr. Happy's, wasn't it? And these days, Mr. Quiet is as happy as he can be. Why, only the other day, do you know what he did on his way home from work? He was so happy, he laughed out loud. Can you imagine? Tee hee hee! Next, please! That was Mr. Quiet by Roger Hargreaves. I hope you enjoyed the story as much as me. And now it's time for you to go to bed and have sweet dreams. And I'll see you in the morning. Good night.